So I started my career at GCHQ, and I also worked at the World Economic Forum. And the key thing over the last 10, 15 years has been about the impact of technology and how it's transformed the landscape. How it's transformed the landscape for government, how it's transformed the landscape for business, and ultimately for strategic planning. So I've got you for 30 minutes, and I'm going to go on a journey. I'm going to start in 1815, and I'm going to get you all the way to today and tomorrow at your desks. I've got you for 30 minutes, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And I really want us to elevate ourselves out of our day job, and we're going to start thinking about the big picture. And I'm going to ask you to help me along this journey. So starting my career at GCHQ, tracking bad guys, tracking cyber criminals and nation states. And like Joe said earlier, it's been a transformative experience for the government. But really the job that I've got now is my favorite role. So I'm a senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. It sounds very impressive. Can anybody tell me what it is? I'll ask another question. Who's Britain's most famous general? It's not a hard one, it's in the title. Who's Britain's most famous general in history? The Duke of Wellington. Why is the Duke of Wellington famous? What did the Duke of Wellington do? Waterloo, that's right. He won the Battle of Waterloo. He defeated Napoleon on the Battle of Waterloo, and he saved Europe from dictatorship for a generation. What did he say about the Battle of Waterloo? He said it was the closest damn thing you'd ever seen in your life. He said if the Prussians hadn't turned up right when they did, he would have lost the battle, and Europe would have fallen under Napoleon for a generation. It's really important. The Duke of Wellington won the Battle of Waterloo, and he became Prime Minister. He was a terrible Prime Minister. And the day after he left Downing Street, he walked over the road and he said, the reason why Napoleon had nearly won the Battle of Waterloo and why he dominated Europe, he'd conquered Eastern Europe, he'd conquered Spain, he'd conquered France, he'd forced Britain off the continent, was that they understood and harnessed next generation technology into their warfighter. Artillery, logistics, and he'd built a system that defeated every major army at the time. Why is that important for you? What's the military in charge of? What does he do? What's a general in charge of? The head of the nation, military. They're about the resilience of the nation. What are you in charge of? The resilience of your enterprises. So I want you to start thinking about strategic planning, and we're going to do that together. Because as strategic planners, what he did was he said, I can never let this happen again. So he founded the Royal United Services Institute in 1830, and we focus on next generation technology and how it impacts strategic planning. And the reason why we do this is we're terrible at it. We tend to get it wrong all the time. Strategic planners, military in particular, at the national level, really underestimate and get the impact of technology wrong all the time. And I'm going to tell you a story to demonstrate this. And then I'm going to talk about Ukraine. And then I'm going to take some lessons from Ukraine that you can take back to your desk. So there's 3 parts of this. So let's get into the first part. I want to talk about technology transformation failures at strategic level. Anybody know who this is? There's some good military men. I know there's some military men in here. It's Lord Kitchener. Who is Lord Kitchener? He's very famous. He's on all the old posters of Your Country Needs You. At the time, he was the Minister of War during the First World War. In essence, he was the most important military figure in the First World War at the height of the British Empire, mobilizing millions of individuals to fight the First World War. In 1916, we had the first tank. What did he say about the first tank? He said it had Pretty mechanical toy, but without serious military value. Okay, he said it was useless. And the reason why was it was pretty useless. It's stuck in the mud. It had no strategic value to him as a warfighter. The other military innovation in the First World War was the aircraft as well. And we started using aircraft. But Kitchener said these things were useless. Okay? So in 1916, this large technology transformation, the invention of tank, mechanized warfare, no value. I'm going to ask you a question. This is 1939. I've got two tanks here. The one on this side is a French tank. This is a German tank. 1939. Anyone tell me the difference between the two tanks? Just shout it out. What did somebody...
Reverse gear.
Reverse gear? No. No. Very funny, but no. Okay, anything else? Declan, who's heard me before, has got right before it. What if I told you this French tank was in every way superior to the German tank? It had better armor, it was quicker, and was technologically superior to the German tank in every way except for one thing. And Declan's right. The Germans did something very important. They stuck a two-way antenna on it. And what did that lead to? The French were using it to protect their infantry. So the French had a tank. They stuck their infantry behind it and used it as a defensive weapon. The Germans put an antenna on it, and they could now use mechanized warfare offensively. It meant that their tanks could talk to their Luftwaffe and could speak to their infantry. And this is the key behind the conquering of Western Europe in September 1939. And I illustrate this because in strategic planning terms, we get it wrong all the time. And a technology that gets invented sometimes will take time to understand its relevance. And that's really important. We did it with submarines, we did it with nuclear, and we're probably, I'd say, probably doing the same with cyber. So what's the lesson here? The lesson here was that technology, raw technological power, wasn't as important as integration and planning and communications. The other lesson is strategic planners get this wrong all the time. So I'm going to illustrate a second point now. So I'm going to talk about Ukraine, and I'm going to ask you a strategic question. I want you to imagine that you're with me at the Royal United Services Institute in the grand building next to 10 Downing Street, and you're going to explain to the Duke of Wellington what cyber does. So get your phones out, and there's a QR code. If you're going to explain to the Duke of Wellington what does cyber do, you're all cyber professionals, and you're going to explain to him what it actually does strategically, I want you to put the answer up there. What does it actually do at a strategic level? So the QR codes, it should take you to Slido, give you a minute. What does it do? You're going to explain to the Duke of Wellington. He's there drinking his port. He's in a very, very big leather chair, and you're going to say to him, we've just invented this thing called cyber. And he goes, sounds very interesting. What does it do? What does it do? What does cyber do at a strategic level, at a strategic planning level? Connection, power, communications, harnesses, calculation, ease. There's a lot about comms here, speed. Okay. Keeps the port coming. Very good. Man on the inside. Okay, the man on the inside is getting close. Okay. So I'll give us maybe another 20 seconds. Attack. So we used to think about this at GCHQ a lot, and we still think about it a lot in defense planning and security planning. What does it actually do? What does it enable planners to do? And the Duke of Wellington, he set up RUSI, and he also set up the War Studies Department at King's College London, which is the oldest war studies department in the country. And in 2011, a great professor, He took all the case studies that we had of cyber, and he said cyber does these three things. It enables espionage. It enables the adversary to reach out across the world and take information to inform decision-making, okay? It enables spying. It also enables you to denigrate systems. So not only can you take information, you can access systems, and you can degrade those systems. And the third thing you can do is you could subvert the adversary. You can use the information battle space, and you could subvert their activity. And those are the three things that cyber enables you to do from a strategic perspective. The first people to really recognize this were the Russians. And the Russians used Ukraine as their garden. Espionage, sabotage, and subversion. If you're a strategic planner looking at Russia through the SVR and the major GRU units, the military intelligence, the FSB, and the SVR, you could see that they got this reality really quickly. And the advanced persistent threats of Russia were the most advanced adversaries. Black energy was the sabotage of their networks from an energy perspective, and who was involved in the NotPetya incidents as well. WannaCry, a great sabotage where essentially they used a piece of malware to, at the time, was the largest cyber attack in history, took Maersk offline for a number of months. So the Russians were expert at doing this. So we, looking at Russia and looking what they'd done at the Ukraine, we started thinking, when the war starts happening, what will we expect? More cyber sabotage, more CNI disruption, more impact on their critical national infrastructure. So the Russians invade Ukraine in February 2022, just over 3 years ago. Something really strange happened. Just like we'd made miscalculations about technology transformation, we'd made miscalculations, again, about Ukraine and Russia. This is The Hill, one of the US's most important journals, and they're saying, where is Russia's cyber blitzkrieg? We had a tier 1 power, Russia, that had the most advanced APTs, and Ukraine was online. The things we expected to happen, hospitals going offline, power networks going down, airplanes being grounded, didn't happen. So we'd miscalculated again. And they were saying, where is the cyber blitzkrieg? So I'm going to tell you what had happened. Ukraine's journey from a victim to a power was rapid. You can see that very quickly they built defensive resilience. This is, you can see the transformation of the critical incidents that they had in 2022, which was over 1,000, and they very rapidly built a defensive ecosystem, which means they have less than 59 now. How many does the UK have? It was just published in the National Cybersecurity Centre. These are the same frameworks. We worked with the Ukrainians on this, so we use the same frameworks. The UK has 200. So Ukraine has less national incidents than the UK now. And what was that built on? The Russians had used cyber, but in ways that we hadn't thought about. They'd infected around 50 to 100,000 frontline troops via Android malware, and they were tracking troops to aid their kinetic targeting. So yes, the sabotage hadn't happened, but they had been investing in espionage at a tactical level that we hadn't conceptualized. It had been integrated into the warfighter, and then something really important happened as well. The Ukrainians started fighting back, and their offensive operations became incredibly important. They've taken down Moscow's power networks, they've taken down Moscow's airport, they've impacted them in ways that we couldn't understand, even taking down CCTV footage while drones are making strikes around Moscow. So that transformation had happened really, really quickly. And it's a great example of how even looking and making planning is difficult. It's hard. So I want to talk about their use of civilians. What they'd done in Ukraine is they'd harnessed around 300,000 volunteers to start cyber war. So a lot of their offensive operations and defensive operations were the mobilization of skills and expertise in their civilian population. We'd never seen this before. Very important to see. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 things from that journey, which I think are really important to you. And I want you to think about this in the macro level, when we start thinking about cyber in the macro, and the ecosystem that you're now operating is as cyber leaders. Ukraine's transformation defensively was about their ability to orchestrate a defensive ecosystem from those civil society, their defensive networks, huge investment in their own innovation ecosystem. We saw startups emerge very quickly, very skilled population harnessed into their defensive infrastructure. And this thing that's important as well, who's this? This is Brad Smith. So Brad Smith at the time is the CEO of Microsoft, the world's biggest technology company. And what had happened in Ukraine, very quickly, the large American hyperscalers and technology providers had stepped in to provide Ukraine with next-generation infrastructure. The 3 biggest providers, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. But there were a bunch of others, CrowdStrike, Palantir, the large American tech giants stepping in and giving Ukraine capability that they previously hadn't got. And this fed the ecosystem and the innovation, but was able to mitigate. Why is this important? Why does it matter that they're using tech giants? What do the tech giants give the Ukrainians strategically? At a strategic level, why is it important that it was Microsoft and Amazon and Google? What do they give? Scale. Scale. Scale and capability that was able to design out many of the Russian attacks. So for instance, DDoSing Amazon services and Cloudflare services, very hard to do. Okay, so they're incredibly dependent on these companies. They do have their own ecosystem, but the hardware and the infrastructure is being provided for them, and there was an awful lot of intelligence assistance as well. What's happening in the industry that's really important for you is the Ukraine experience is symptomatic of something that's happening in the entire ecosystem. Industries go through 4 cycles. They go through incubation, they go through growth, they go through maturity, and eventually they go through decline. Cyber's not a new industry. It's about 20 years old, and we're going through the consolidation of the industry into large technology providers. These are all the cyber companies that are worth $100 billion in market cap. They've been hugely ramped up by the use of artificial intelligence, because if you have a bigger company, bigger scale, AI is going to help you. Huge investments gone into these companies. What is the strategic issue with these companies if you're a defense planner? And the clue is, I was in Copenhagen last week giving this speech. Why do you think Denmark cares about this? What's the commonality about these 11 companies that dominate the global cyber market now? They're all American. Why does that matter to Denmark? Because Donald Trump said that he potentially might invade or take sovereign countries. So sovereignty has become a huge issue in cybersecurity very quickly. What's the biggest pure play cyber company in Europe? You don't even know it. It's Mimecast. Mimecast is the biggest player. $300 million in average revenue. What's the market cap of Palo Alto Networks? 150 billion. It's the same GDP as Kazakhstan. CrowdStrike a little less, same GDP as Slovakia. And largely this is based on the fact that big companies, scaled companies, do better AI, do better defense. But the regulators are moving on this. The regulators will move on this, and sovereignty and dependence on non-sovereign providers is becoming a big issue. And the EU's moving. They've got a summit today with Macron and Merz, and they're going to move against this. This is a big issue coming to you. The second thing for you as cyber leaders is I want to give the lesson about looking at the evidence. The reason why we make mistakes in strategic planning is because we're often not looking at the empirical evidence. And I want to talk to you about AI and why we make those mistakes. When I talked about those 3 pillars of Russian aggression, espionage, sabotage, and subversion, we always assumed that it would be sabotage and espionage that they would invest in. Well, the evidence actually shows us their resources are hugely going into information operations and subversion. Subversion and info ops are built into the warfighter, and we think they're spending in excess of $1 billion a year on trying to degrade Western support for Ukraine, largely through spending on the hyperscalers and the social media platforms. So my advice to you in this as well is, particularly in an era when we're talking about AI, is look at the evidence. We made a mistake because we were looking at the hypothesis and evidence, what we thought was going to happen, rather than what was actually happening. And Russia and Ukraine was spending billions on subversion, not sabotage and espionage. And you can see the paperwork that's coming out. Recorded Future is very good in this space as well. All of you, I've no doubt, will have been asked about AI and the use of AI. Anthropic put out a report yesterday on Chinese automated APTs. Look at the AI hyperscalers' reports on use of AI. It is not highly complex malware operations. There's huge use of fraud, social engineering, and from a nation-state perspective, info ops. Using AI to generate tens of thousands of bots on narratives and subversion. The issue for us is very hard to quantify. This is last summer and the summer riots. You can see that the summer riots in Southport happened very quickly. BBC, a tweet came out from Eddie Murray. My 2 youngest children went to holiday club this morning in Southport for a day of fun, only for a migrant to enter and murder, fatally wound multiple children. Their kids are fine. They're shocked and hysterics, but they're safe. My thoughts are with the other 30 kids and families that are suffering right now. Eddie Murray put this out on LinkedIn, and within hours, we had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets in Southport, because of the Southport attacks. If you looked at the analysis, we had bots like UK News, even though LinkedIn had taken down his message after minutes, being retweeted by bot farms, now attributed to nation-state activity. Very, very hard for us to understand what's happening in this space, but you've got to look at the evidence. Look at the AI reports. Look at what they're telling us about malicious use in cyberspace. We expect far-right populist parties. They're now topping the polls in Berlin, Paris, and London. And it's also impacting companies. Rio Tinto had to exit a lithium mine in Serbia, largely because of information operations sponsored by nation states, made their investment untenable. The final thing I want to say about why this is important for you here is you often focus on the technology. You remember the tank example? It wasn't the technology that was important. It was the environment it was operating in. And my argument to you is geopolitics is going to drive your role and your job and your career more and more. Why? Firstly, the Ukraine war is still going on. It started in 2015 when Russia invaded the Crimea in 2015. People say we want no more forever wars, but we have forever wars all the time. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. We were in Vietnam for 30. Why is 2015 important? 2015 is important because Russia invaded the Crimea and we stopped speaking to the Russians on cybercrime. What did Joe Tidy tell us this afternoon? He said most of the ransomware gangs come from Russia. We have not spoken to the Russians for 10 years on cybercrime. It's not a strategic priority. Anybody know the gentleman in the middle? Massive priority. This is the dictator or the head of the junta in Burma. Why is he important? Anybody got an issue with romance scams in their companies or pig butchering? I'm seeing a lot of nods. It's the fastest growing fraud type in the US and the UK. Nearly 300,000 people have been trafficked into the Mekong Delta and around Burma into scam farms targeting China and the West. Do we speak to the Burma junta on cybercrime issues? And Xi Jinping, president of China, in a global race of dominance with the Americans. We have not spoken to the Chinese for multiple years because of their APT activity in the UK cyberspace, really since the disclosures of Salt Typhoon. If you're a strategic planner, what's the big problem for the UK here and other Western leaders? Your biggest cybercrime threat, your fastest growing fraud type, and your major APT threat, you don't speak to any of them because your threat is of secondary importance to global competition. So my argument to you is that this is the environment you're operating in. That actually this ecosystem, the geopolitics, trade, America, China, the role of the UK, they're all landing on your desk. That you don't just have a role that's about cybersecurity. You're actual strategic planners and leaders in your own right. And what I wanted to do over the last 30 minutes was just lift us up a little bit and think about that bigger picture. Think about the ecosystem that you're operating in. And yes, these are challenges, but they're also opportunities for you as leaders. The opportunities for you to become more important in the success of your business and play a role in this ecosystem, making it more safe and secure for us. Why does it matter now? Because we've just committed, as the West, to 5% GDP spending and rearming the continent. When was the last time that NATO spent 5% on GDP funding? Never. Never. We've just committed to 5% GDP funding for defense and security. 1.5% is dedicated to investing in cyber resilience. Huge investment coming into the continent. So these are the three questions I really want you to think about. How will you engage in mitigation concentration risk? As we collapse onto fewer and fewer providers, what does that mean for your role and how will you mitigate it? What does AI actually mean for you? Look at the evidence. Look at the case studies. Look at what your business is doing. And think about how geopolitics is shaping your role now, and it will for the next 5 to 10 years. I've hugely appreciated having your attention for 30 minutes. I'm right on time, all the way from 1815 right to today. If you'd like to chat to me, do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've enjoyed it immensely being back in Northern England and practicing my accent. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you.